He fired me at 8:45 a.m. in front of his entire leadership team because I refused to train his influencer nephew on the system I spent 9 years building. One moment, I was the architect who held the whole operation together, and the next, I was being escorted out like a threat, while that kid recorded my humiliation for his followers. People always ask why I didn't fight back right there. The truth? I didn't need to. They had no idea what I still controlled, what I'd quietly protected long before that morning. If you're new here, subscribe and tell me in the comments what you'd have done. I woke up that morning believing it would be another routine day, the kind where you move on autopilot because you've been doing the same demanding job for nearly a decade. I grabbed my coffee, double-checked my daughter's reminders on the fridge, and headed into the heat rising off the Phoenix freeway. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing warned me that by 8:45 a.m., my entire career would be ripped out from under me. People online always ask, how did you not see it coming? The answer is simple. When you give years of loyalty to a company, you stop expecting the ambush to come from your own team. I'd built Astrolink Grid from the ground up. Every route algorithm, every coordination protocol, every safeguard that kept their massive logistics fleet running without crashes or delays. My name wasn't on the building, but the truth was, the entire operation rested on what lived inside my head. And because of that, I assumed, naively, that I was safe. That loyalty protected me. That competence insulated me. That no rational executive would gamble their company's backbone so carelessly. But walking into the glass atrium that morning, I noticed a different kind of energy in the air. Not loud, not obvious, just off. People avoiding eye contact, assistants whispering, a stiffness in the way conversation stopped as I passed. I brushed it off, telling myself it was pre-show nerves. In 3 hours, Julian, the CEO, would be showcasing Astrolink to a lineup of heavyweight private investors. A $380 million partnership was on the line. We'd spent all week preparing the system for the demonstration, and I'd barely slept. I assumed everyone else was running on the same level of exhaustion. I didn't know yet that the real reason for the tension had nothing to do with investor pressure and everything to do with a decision Julian had already made about me. I stepped into the executive wing, expecting a final prep meeting, maybe a rundown of the schedule. Instead, I found Julian standing in front of his office windows with his arms crossed, staring out over the parking lot like he was practicing how to look powerful. And sitting on the corner of his desk, legs dangling, hoodie half-zipped, holding an iced drink, was his nephew Blake. If you've ever dealt with nepotism, you'll understand that sinking feeling you get before anyone says a word. A sense that something unfair is already in motion. Blake looked up at me with that casual, careless grin I'd seen in screenshots when my daughter showed me his videos. 3 million followers, pranks, behind-the-scenes clips, flashy nonsense, the kind of guy companies hire for marketing stunts, never for core system training. I told myself there had to be another reason he was here. Maybe he was doing a harmless promo piece for the showcase. Maybe he was meeting Julian for lunch. Anything but what was actually coming. Because even though I'd dedicated years to this place, even though I'd sacrificed weekends and holidays, even though Astrolink was the reason these investors were flying in today, none of that mattered the moment Julian decided that Blake's clout was more valuable than my expertise. And the worst part? In that first moment before he opened his mouth, I still believed he respected me enough not to cross the line he was about to step over. Julian didn't waste time pretending anything was normal. The moment I stepped inside, he shut the door behind me with a finality that made the hairs on my arms rise. He didn't offer me a seat, didn't ask about the overnight diagnostics I'd run, didn't even nod in acknowledgement. Instead, he gestured toward Blake like he was presenting some revolutionary hire instead of a kid in a hoodie sipping a caramel drink. "Empir," he said, "we're making a strategic shift today." That was the first sign something was wrong. Julian loved buzzwords when he was nervous. Strategic shift was the same phrase he'd used 6 months earlier when he replaced the entire analytics team with cheaper contractors who barely knew how to operate the dashboards. I took a breath and kept my voice steady. "What shift?" Blake jumped in before his uncle could answer. "Uncle Jay says you're going to walk me through Astrolink today," he said, grinning like this was a fun backstage tour. We're thinking of doing a launch collab, kind of like Inside the Grid, showing my followers how logistics tech works. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. A $380 million investor demonstration was happening in 3 hours, and this kid thought I was supposed to prep him for content? No, I said, because there was no universe in which that made sense. But Julian stepped between us like he expected the pushback and was already irritated by it. This isn't optional, he said. Investors want modernization. They want us to reach younger markets. Blake offers visibility we can't buy. Visibility doesn't run a logistics grid, I replied. Experience does. Julian exhaled sharply, as if I were the one being unreasonable. You'll give him an overview, he said. Architecture, routing logic, the coordination layers, high-level stuff. Enough so he can talk about it confidently on stream. My pulse hit my ears. Astralink isn't a marketing prop, I said. It's the system that controls 80% of the fleet movement we handle. You don't give high-level access to someone whose career depends on going viral. Blake lifted his phone like he was about to record. Relax, I don't need the whole thing, just a walkthrough. People love seeing complicated stuff explained simply. I didn't even look at him. I looked at Julian because there was only one person responsible for what was happening. You want me to train him? I said slowly, so he can use Astralink for influencer content before a multi-million-dollar investor demonstration? Julian didn't blink. It's the direction we're moving in. And that was the moment I realized he wasn't asking, he was ordering. People online always say, why didn't you just keep the peace? Why not just show him something basic? Why not wait until after the meeting? Because once you compromise the principles that protect the backbone of your work, you never stop compromising. And Julian knew exactly what he was demanding. I won't do it, I said. No wavering, no apology, just the truth. Blake muttered, weird reaction, under his breath, still holding his phone like this was entertainment. Julian's jaw tightened. You're being inflexible, he snapped. This is why we need fresh blood, adaptability, creativity. He kept talking, piling on empty management phrases that didn't mean anything, not in the real world where responsibility actually mattered. Our investors expect innovation, he said. They expect a modern image. They expect stability, I shot back. They expect the system to work flawlessly in 3 hours, and you're gambling that on a social media stunt. That's when Julian's expression changed, not anger, but something colder, decided. If you can't align with our direction, he said, then you're no longer a fit here. Blake lifted his phone higher. Should I get this part? And Julian didn't tell him to stop. That told me everything. He'd already chosen the nephew over the architect, the brand over the backbone, the show over the substance. You're terminating me, I said, not because I needed clarity, but because some part of me couldn't believe he was willing to torch the entire morning like this. Effective immediately, he replied. Security will escort you to gather your things. He didn't thank me for the years, didn't acknowledge the sacrifices, didn't hesitate. A decision that reckless never does. And that's when I realized the betrayal wasn't sudden at all. It had been building quietly behind closed doors, long before this morning. And while he thought this firing was the end of my story with Astralink, it was really just the end of his control over it. Because he had no idea what protections I'd put in place long before today, protections meant for exactly this moment. The moment Julian said the word security, the door opened almost on cue, as if they'd been standing outside waiting for the signal. 2 guards stepped in, men I'd known for years, men who had helped me carry equipment during emergency overhauls, men who had eaten pizza with my team during midnight system resets. Their faces held that careful, neutral professionalism that only appears when someone in power has ordered them to pretend they don't know you. Blake swung his phone toward them like he was filming a celebrity sighting. Yo, is this for real? He whispered to no one in particular, and Julian didn't say a single word to stop him. One of the guards, Matteo, gave me the smallest apologetic look. Not much, just enough for me to catch it before he wiped it away. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we need to escort you downstairs to collect your belongings." It was the ma'am that twisted something deep in my chest, not the respect kind, the distance kind. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without my voice betraying something I wasn't willing to give Julian the satisfaction of seeing. As we walked out of the office, people pretended to type harder. Eyes darted up and then down. A few watched openly, the way people watch a car wreck they swear they aren't interested in, but can't look away from. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, is she really being escorted?" Another said, "Before the showcase?" A third muttered, "This company's going off the rails." That one stuck with me. They didn't know how right they were. Mateo and the other guard walked a step behind me down the long corridor, as if I were suddenly a risk to the company I'd carried for years. Every security camera I passed felt like a reminder of how systems can be twisted against the very people who built them. And that online question people always ask, "Why didn't you tell someone? Why didn't you raise hell?" I will answer it here the same way I answered it in my own head that day. When someone powerful has already decided you're the villain in their story, nothing you say changes their script. We reached my workspace. The guard scanned me in because my badge had already been deactivated. That part stung more than I expected. The instant cut. The instant erasure. Like I'd never existed in the building except as a liability they needed removed before the investors arrived. My desk looked exactly the same as it had when I left it 2 hours earlier. Photos of my daughter, a worn notebook filled with sketches of early Astrolink models, the coffee mug my niece made me with a crooked sticker that said, "Engineers make the world work." I packed in silence, not because I felt defeated, but because I knew anger would only slow me down. Julian wanted to humiliate me. He wanted me rattled. He wanted a moment that made him feel in control. I wasn't going to give him that. I took down my photos one by one, wrapping them in a sweater from my drawer. I placed the mug carefully on top. Then I reached for the only thing that mattered, my small, ordinary-looking external drive, not company property, never had been, purchased with my own money, labeled with nothing. Inside it lived the legal documentation, the licensing contracts, and a single dormant sequence known only to me. The lockout protocol I'd designed years earlier, back when I first realized Julian had ambitions bigger than his competence. To anyone else, the drive looked like backup storage. To me, it was insurance. Not revenge, not sabotage, insurance. When I zipped my bag, Blake appeared in the doorway again, phone up, recording. "Uncle Jay said to make sure you don't take anything that belongs to the company," he said, trying to sound authoritative but ending up sounding like a kid playing security guard. I held his gaze long enough for him to lower the phone. "Everything I'm taking is mine." He didn't understand the double meaning, and that was the beautiful part. The guards led me toward the elevator, walking slowly, almost protectively. Mateo leaned close enough to whisper, "This is wrong." I appreciated it more than he knew. As the elevator descended, I watched the floors tick by, 28, 27, 26, as if each number were wiping another layer of my old life away. And beneath the humiliation, beneath the rage, beneath the disbelief, there was something else beginning to grow. Not hope, not revenge, something sharper, something steadier, something no one in that building expected me to feel. Clarity. They thought they were escorting me out. What they didn't know was that I was walking away with the one thing they could never steal, the power to decide what happened next. I stepped out into the blinding Arizona heat, the kind that makes the pavement shimmer like a mirage, and for the first time all morning I could finally breathe. Not because I felt free, humiliation clung to me like dust, but because I was away from the performance Julian had staged for his nephew. The guards walked me to the edge of the parking lot and then peeled off, giving me a respectful nod. They knew something was off. Everyone did, but I was the only one who knew just how drastically the balance of power had shifted the moment Julian said, "Terminated." I sat in my car, hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the building that had taken nearly a decade of my life. I should have cried. I should have screamed. I should have let myself feel the betrayal. Instead, all I felt was the steady, cooling sensation of purpose. People always ask, did you know instantly what you were going to do next? Yes, I knew before I even left Julian's office. Because years ago, long before today, I had learned a painful lesson about trust. One that shaped every decision I made about Astralink's architecture. When my family went through a financial crisis during my sister's medical battle, I realized how quickly stability could evaporate. I promised myself that no corporation, no CEO, no board would ever have the power to strand me again. That's why I'd formed Hale Systems LLC, quietly, legally, properly, and through that structure, every design patent, every routing blueprint, every unique algorithm that made Astralink function belonged to me, not the company. They only had usage rights, contingent on employment conditions. Conditions Julian violated the moment he fired me without a proper transition protocol. I reached for the small, external drive in my bag. Not dramatic, not flashy, just a simple silver device that held the paperwork confirming everything Julian never bothered to understand. But more importantly, it contained Safeguard Circuit 7. People hear that name and assume it's some complex technical weapon. It's not. It's a protective shutdown mechanism, something I created to ensure Astralink couldn't be altered, exploited, or resold without the explicit authorization of its architect. Not sabotage, not revenge, protection. Julian always assumed technology existed to serve him. He never once asked what existed to protect the system from him. I plugged the drive into my laptop, connected through my personal hotspot, and logged into a channel no one else knew existed. A back-end interface buried so deeply in Astralink's architecture, it may as well have been carved into stone. "Welcome, architect," the screen displayed. I breathed out, calm and certain. In 3 hours, dozens of investors would stand in a conference room expecting a demonstration that showcased a system they assumed Julian controlled. But control is an illusion when you don't understand the foundation of what you claim to own. I navigated to Safeguard Circuit 7, a simple sequence, a confirmation field, a timer. I didn't activate it out of anger. I activated it because the system I built deserved better than being used as a prop in someone's social media stunt. It deserved integrity. It deserved stewardship. And whether Julian realized it or not, I was still its steward. When the confirmation prompt appeared, I placed my finger on the biometric sensor. The timer initialized, 2 hours until full lockdown. By the time the investors were seated, Astralink would go silent, and I would no longer be the one losing anything. I drove to the cafe across the street from the logistics corridor, ordered the strongest cold brew they had, and parked where I could see the reflection of the corporate tower in the shop's glass wall. The countdown on my screen ticked steadily downward. 90 minutes, 80, 70. Every second pulled me further from the humiliation of the morning and closer to the moment Julian would finally learn the difference between owning a company and owning the work that kept it alive. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't hopeful. I wasn't even angry anymore. What I felt was the quiet, steady certainty that comes when someone finally tries to take advantage of you one time too many. When the timer hit 10 minutes, my phone buzzed. Mason, my most trusted engineer, messaged, "Something feels wrong. Investors everywhere. Blake has been filming since he walked in." I sent one line back. "Watch the screens." Another message came seconds later. "Julian looks like he's about to ascend to heaven. He actually thinks this is going to work." He did. Of course he did. Men like Julian believe consequences are optional. 5 minutes before 0, I switched to the internal status monitor to watch the system from my end. The investor showcase was already underway. Dozens of executives in suits, rows of analysts, a full media wall behind them. Blake setting up his ring light like he was about to unbox a luxury sneaker drop, not record a demonstration of the very system he nearly derailed that morning. I imagined Julian greeting the room with that polished smile he practiced in the mirror, the one he used when he wanted people to believe he understood the technology he barely skimmed. He would have bragged about modernization, optimization, scalability. He would have talked about Astralink like he built it with his bare hands. The arrogance of it would have been almost comical if the stakes weren't so high. Then the room would have gone quiet for the startup sequence. The system would flash its signature blue interface. The load balancing graph would spike perfectly. The grid mapping display would start calibrating. For 30 seconds, everything would look flawless. And then the first message would appear. Architect authentication required. Not an error, a barrier, a line in the sand. Mason told me later that someone in the front row laughed at first, thinking it was a simple login glitch. But that laugh died fast when the system rejected every credential they tried. Access denied. Employment verification failed. Clearance revoked. The room, he said, shifted from curiosity to dread in under a minute. Someone asked if there had been a cyber attack. Someone else suggested rebooting the grid controller. Another wondered aloud if the network had dropped. Then, with 3 seconds left on my countdown, the entire wall of displays blinked, and Astralink died. Not with noise, not with sparks. Just a sudden, suffocating silence, screens fading into black, one after another, like candles being blown out in a cavern. In the reflection of the cafe window, I watched the color drain from Julian's face on Mason's covert video feed. Investors sat frozen, expressionless. Analysts began typing frantically. One executive stood up so sharply his chair toppled. Blake kept recording, until the words appeared on every screen in massive white text. System lockdown initiated, safeguard circuit 7 engaged, all access revoked. And below it, the line I knew would hollow Julian out completely. For licensing or ownership inquiries, contact Hale Systems LLC. My full legal name wasn't on the message. It didn't need to be. Everyone in that room knew exactly whose safeguard they'd just triggered. Mason texted instantly. Holy hell, the entire room is staring at Julian. Another. Investors leaving. Some are on their phones already. It's over. I watched through the feed as Julian's composure cracked in real time. He grabbed the nearest engineer, demanding answers the poor kid didn't have. He shouted at the IT lead. He cursed at the room, and Blake, still filming, caught every second. In that moment, Astralink wasn't the only thing shutting down. So was his empire. As the final message pulsed across the screens, illuminating his panic-stricken face, I felt no triumph. No gloating, just confirmation. This was never revenge. It was accountability, and it was long overdue. I stayed in my car long after the showcase collapsed, watching the tower across the street come apart through a combination of Mason's messages and the subtle tremors of panic spilling out onto the sidewalks as employees hurried in and out of the building. I didn't need to be inside to know exactly what was happening in those conference rooms. Investors were turning on Julian. Department heads were scrambling. The board was probably already drafting statements to distance themselves from him. That's how power works. It never disappears. It just changes hands. And mine was sliding neatly back into place, exactly where it belonged. My phone rang nonstop for the next hour. Unknown numbers, corporate extensions, Julian's direct line. I didn't answer any of them. The people who dismissed me that morning didn't suddenly get access to my time just because they finally recognized the magnitude of their mistake. Around noon, Mason called from outside the building. His voice had that stunned quality people get after witnessing a slow-motion disaster they're still trying to comprehend. It's chaos in there, he said. They tried everything, multiple restarts, backup servers. They even brought in a consultant on standby for the investor event. Nothing works without you. He hesitated before adding, Julian's been yelling for 20 minutes straight. I took a sip of my now warm cold brew. He'll burn himself out. They're asking if you'll come back, he said quietly. Reinstatement, full salary recovery, promotion, equity, control of engineering, whatever you want. I don't blame people for expecting me to say yes. In every workplace story, there's always that moment where the betrayed employee returns triumphantly, reclaiming their position. But that's not victory. That's going back into the same cage, just with nicer cushions. I'm not returning, I said. Mason didn't argue. He'd always understood the difference between repairing something and rebuilding from scratch. They don't know what to do, he said. They're terrified. Good, I answered, "They should be." I ended the call, then drove downtown to the one person who had been waiting years for this moment. Celine Ward. She ran a private industrial tech fund with an instinct sharper than most CEOs I'd ever met. Her office overlooked the Phoenix skyline, a sweep of glass towers and sunlit sprawl. The moment I walked in, she closed her laptop with the calmness of someone who already knew why I was there. "Interesting morning for your former employer," she said. I sat across from her, placing the external drive on the table between us. "Astralink is legally mine," I said. "I'm ready to build something better than what they ever understood." Celine studied me for a long moment. "And what do you want?" "A team that deserves stability," I said. "A company run by competence, not nepotism. A structure built on integrity." Her smile was small, but unmistakably satisfied. "Then let's build it." By the end of the meeting, Hale Operations Integration was no longer just an idea. It was an entity with capital, legal backing, and a future. We drafted offers for key engineers. We mapped the early expansion plan. We outlined how to present Astralink to the right partners, the ones who valued reliability over spectacle. When I stepped out of her building, the sun had begun sinking behind the desert skyline. My phone buzzed with another message from Mason. "Julian is begging for you." I typed back one sentence. Begging won't fix what he broke. Because the truth was simple. He hadn't just fired me. He'd freed me. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the story had already spread farther than I expected. Mason sent me screenshots from internal chats. Half the company in open revolt, engineers threatening to walk, analysts demanding explanations, senior managers posting panicked messages about unexpected system behavior. Investors pulled out before lunchtime. The board held an emergency session and stripped Julian of authority so fast he didn't even get to finish defending himself. In a single morning, everything he'd gambled on crumbled. He had risked the backbone of his company for a few minutes of influencer hype. And now, he was learning that once trust collapses, so does everything built on top of it. Meanwhile, things on my side moved faster than I dared hope. Celine filed the paperwork for Hale Operations Integration before noon, securing founder control under my name. By mid-afternoon, we had office space. Small, nothing glamorous, but more mine than anything I'd ever had at Origin. And by evening, my inbox was overflowing with messages from people who wanted to join. Not out of desperation, out of belief. People who had seen what Julian did and realized they didn't have to stay loyal to a sinking ship. People who had watched me hold the system together for years and knew exactly who the real architect was. People who were ready to build something better. Didn't hire everyone? I couldn't. But the ones I brought in, Mason, 2 senior architects, an operations lead, 3 planners, felt like the foundation of something strong and unshakable. We set up our first meeting in a cramped room with borrowed chairs, whiteboards still leaning against the walls. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt inside Origin for a long time. Alignment. No egos, no games, no one pretending to understand systems they'd never touched. Just the shared certainty that we were about to change everything. The new investors, ones Celine hand-selected, asked questions that actually mattered. How do we make the grid more resilient? How do we scale ethically? How do we protect operator oversight? Not once did anyone say, "Can we get an influencer involved?" While we built, Origin withered. Reports trickled in from employees still inside. Routes were backed up for days. Clients were furious. Investors cut ties. Departments collapsed under pressure. And Julian's nephew, whose steady live streams had once been his entire identity, went radio silent. The kid disappeared from the building the minute things fell apart. Rumor had it he tried to delete every video he'd ever taken inside the company, but the clips had already spread. Everyone had seen the smug smile he wore while I was escorted out. Everyone had watched his recording of the showcase meltdown. Influence cuts both ways. It can lift you or bury you. A week after Astralink locked down, the board finally reached out to me directly. Not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. Direct calls, direct messages, direct pleading. "We need you back. We can restore your title. We'll triple the equity package. You can restructure the entire engineering division. I responded once, the system doesn't belong to you. After that, I let Celine's legal team handle the rest. And when Origin filed a lawsuit, claiming I'd somehow sabotaged them, the court dismissed it almost immediately. The licensing clauses were ironclad. Every signature confirmed Astrolink belonged to Hale Systems LLC. Their downfall wasn't sabotage, it was negligence. Their negligence. 3 weeks later, Hale Operations Integration signed a partnership with one of the largest national retailers in the country, a contract worth more than double what Origin had been chasing. When I walked into that meeting, the executives didn't see an employee. They saw a founder, a creator, a leader. And when I presented Astrolink's relaunch, safeguards intact, operation stable, future-proof design, they didn't question whether it would work. They knew it would. 6 months later, we had expanded into 2 new buildings in 3 states. Our team grew to over 100. The system I designed, once nearly hijacked for influencer content, became the new standard for private fleet coordination across the Southwest. But the moment that stays with me the most didn't happen in an office or a boardroom. It happened at home, when my daughter sat at the kitchen table scrolling through news about Hale Operations Integration. "Mom," she said, looking up at me with a grin, "you didn't just land on your feet, you launched." I laughed, but she wasn't wrong. Julian thought firing me would remove an obstacle. Instead, he released the one person he couldn't afford to underestimate. They tried to take credit for what I built. They tried to minimize the value of the work that held their world together. They tried to make me small, but what they never understood, and what they learned too late, is that the person who builds the foundation doesn't crumble when the structure collapses. They rise. And once you rise, no one who tried to break you gets to claim a piece of what you become. When I look back on everything that happened, the lesson that stays with me isn't about winning or destroying the people who tried to break me. It's about understanding where my power actually lived. I used to believe security came from loyalty, from showing up early, staying late, proving myself over and over again. But the truth is, no amount of hard work can protect you if the wrong people are holding the steering wheel. What saved me in the end wasn't anger. It wasn't even revenge. It was preparation. It was having the courage to set boundaries long before anyone tried to cross them. I learned that you can't control how others treat you, but you can absolutely control how much access they get to what you build. And sometimes the most powerful answer isn't fighting back. It's stepping aside and letting people face the consequences they created for themselves. A lot of Americans know what it feels like to be overlooked after years of giving everything to a job. Many know the sting of being replaced by someone with connections instead of competence. In real life, you won't always get the dramatic moment where everything collapses in front of the whole room, but you can still protect your value. You can still choose not to let someone else define your worth, and you can still walk away knowing you didn't let betrayal turn you into something smaller. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife, the kind that doesn't wound you, but cleanly cuts you free. How to get started today. Make a private list of what you've built that no one can take from you. Skills, knowledge, experience. Identify one boundary you've been afraid to enforce and commit to strengthening it this week. Update a resume, a portfolio, or a personal project you've been neglecting. Something that puts power back in your hands. Reach out to one person who believes in you more than your workplace does. You need allies, not audiences. If this story hit something in you, tell me in the comments. Share your thoughts, share your own experiences, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story.